So imagine walking into a room, right? You look down at a wooden table, and you see three shiny red apples sitting there in a row.
Okay, pretty simple setup.
Yeah, simple. But now, I want you to imagine literally not having the brain circuitry or even the language to know that there are three apples.
Right. And you should be clear, this isn't because you're visually impaired.
Exactly. Not visually impaired, not unintelligent, but simply because the very concept of the number three, well, it just does not exist in your universe.
It's just not there.
Right. For you, the literal edge of reality, like the absolute maximum limit of countable things in the entire cosmos, stops at two.
Which is such a wild cognitive boundary to try and place yourself in.
It really is. If there is a third apple on that table, it instantly blurs into this overwhelming infinite category of just, it sounds like science fiction, or some bizarre thought experiment.
Or sure, it feels like a glitch in the matrix or something.
Yeah, exactly. But for tens of thousands of years of human history, that was the baseline reality. The number three was basically a piece of technology and invention that just hadn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
So today, for this deep dive, we are exploring how humanity invented the numbers that literally built our reality. And let me tell you, it completely shatters the assumption that numbers are just these dry, functional tools for counting change or, measuring flour for a recipe.
It really forces us to completely reevaluate what mathematics actually is. I mean, we've been conditioned to view numbers as objective, pre-existing laws of the universe.
Right, like gravity.
Exactly, like gravity or thermodynamics. Like early humans just tripped over the number 4 one day and discovered it. We treat numbers as cold, hard data.
Yeah, just absolute facts.
But the archaeological, linguistic, and anthropological sources we're looking at today reveal something far more profound. Numbers are actually the physical, documented footprints of human consciousness expanding.
I love that phrasing, footprints of consciousness.
Right, because when a society invents a new number, they aren't just doing better accounting, they're fundamentally expanding the boundaries of what their minds can hold. Math is, at its absolute core, humanity's evolving attempt to understand the size of the universe.
And our specific place within it, right?
Yes, exactly.
So the mission for this deep dive is to trace that breathtaking evolution. We're going to explore the history of mathematics, not as, a series of equations on a chalkboard, but as a mirror of human philosophy.
Philosophical mirror, yeah.
We're going to follow the thread of the ultimate number, meaning the biggest idea a human mind could possibly hold, starting from those absolute biological limits of early humans, all the way to the cosmic, mind-bending scales of ancient civilizations.
And the contrasts are going to be wild.
Oh, completely. To really anchor this, we're going to closely compare how different ancient empires specifically, we're going to look really closely at Sumer and the Maya, how they perceive numbers in radically different ways.
Which is going to completely upend how you think about counting.
Definitely. We'll see how their numbers were heavily loaded with profound philosophical and spiritual meanings. They looked at the exact same physical universe, but because of the mechanics of their counting systems, they lived in entirely different realities. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to do this properly, we have to kind of strip away all the modern scaffolding, right? We have to go back to the biological baseline of human cognition.
Long before empires or written words on clay tablets.
Exactly. We have to look at how the brain processes quantity without the cultural software of a number line installed.
Because we tend to think of counting as innate. We assume that the moment an early human opened their eyes, they started thinking, oh, 1 tree, 2 trees, 3 trees.
Right, like counting is just a factory setting on the human brain.
Exactly. But cognitive science proves otherwise. So let's look at that absolute dawn of human perception, where 2 was the edge of the universe. But how do we actually know this wasn't just lost to history? Like, how can we study the biological baseline of math today?
So we actually have living linguistic proof of this. The most compelling evidence comes from a landmark 2004 study. It was published in the journal Science by a cognitive scientist named Peter Gordon.
Yeah.
Gordon spent a significant amount of time living with and studying the Pirahan tribe. They're this incredibly isolated indigenous group living deep in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil.
Deep in the Amazon, okay.
And linguists have just been absolutely fascinated by the Pirahan language for decades, mostly because of what it lacks.
What do you mean? Like, what does it lack?
Well, for one, it doesn't have words for specific colors.
Wait, really? No color words?
Nope. They rely entirely on descriptions, like saying something is blood-like or leaf-like. It also doesn't really use past or future tense in the rigid, structured way that we do. And crucially, for our deep dive today, it essentially lacks numbers entirely.
Okay, my brain is already struggling here. So what happens when a cognitive scientist sits down with a member of this tribe and, say, puts objects on a table? How do they communicate quantity if they literally don't have numbers?
Right, so Gordon designed these incredibly specific, nonverbal matching experiments to test this exact thing. He would sit across from a Pirahon hunter and place, for example, a row of AA batteries on the table.
To batteries.
And then he would ask the hunter to match that array using sticks or nuts. Just match the layout. Gordon found that their language basically operates on a system that translates roughly to one, two, and many.
One, two, and many.
Yeah, but even those translations are a bit too rigid for how they actually speak. A more accurate translation of their words would be something like a small size or amount, a somewhat larger size or amount, and a whole bunch.
Let me picture the mechanics of this experiment because I want to make sure I'm getting this. So Gordon puts down 2 batteries. The hunter puts down 2 sticks. That seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yes, very straightforward.
But what happens when Gordon puts down 3 batteries or 4?
And that is exactly where the cognitive threshold becomes visible. When Gordon placed 3 or 4 items down, the accuracy of the Pirahon participants just plummeted.
Oh.
They couldn't consistently match 4 batteries with 4 sticks. They would put down a handful of sticks, maybe 3, maybe 5. Because their language doesn't have a specific word for 4, they literally don't have a mental filing cabinet to hold that exact quantity.
That is wild.
The moment the quantity surpassed 2, it instantly crossed this cognitive threshold into many. It just became an uncountable mass.
You know, it's so tempting to look at that from a Western modern perspective and assume it's some sort of cognitive deficit, like, oh, they just haven't leveled up their technology tree yet.
Yeah, that's a really common reaction.
But how do they function? Like, how do you build a structure or trade or gather food if you literally can't count to 4?
And see, that assumption of a deficit is the biggest mistake modern observers make. It is absolutely not a lack of intelligence. It is actually a beautifully efficient, perfectly functional worldview adapted to their specific environment.
Really? Efficient how?
Think about it. If you live as an egalitarian hunter-gatherer in the dense, overwhelming ecosystem of the Amazon rainforest, you don't need a ledger detailing whether there are exactly 47 fish in a section of the river or 48.
Oh, I see.
You survive by knowing if there is one fish, a couple of fish, or a massive swarm of fish.
That makes total sense.
Right. And when they build a structure, they aren't measuring 4 identical posts in advance. They use visual, one-to-one correspondence in the moment.
So they just eyeball it.
Exactly. They place a post, look at it, and cut another one to match its exact height. It is immediate, highly contextual problem solving, completely devoid of abstract numerical tracking.
Okay, I'm really trying to put myself in that mindset. Let me try an analogy here to see if this captures the mechanism.
Go for it.
Think about walking into a massive cavernous library, like the Library of Congress. You walk through the doors, you look at the towering shelves, and your brain does not attempt to count the individual books.
No, of course not. You'd go crazy.
Right. You don't stand there and calculate, oh, I'm looking at exactly 14,322 books. Your brain just registers, okay, there's one book in my hand, maybe another book on the table, and an ocean of knowledge surrounding me.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Your brain just immediately jumps from the specific manageable items in your immediate physical grasp, right straight to the conceptual infinite. So for early humans, that ocean of overwhelming quantity just started at 3 items instead of thousands.
What's fascinating here is the profound philosophical implication of that one-to-many system. It represents the very first stage of human cognitive evolution regarding quantity.
How so?
Well, in this worldview, the entire universe is divided into 3 distinct philosophical buckets. 1 represents the self. It's singular, it's immediate, it's central.
Okay.
2 represents the other, or the pair. It encompasses you and me, or natural binaries like night and day, or, my 2 hands. But the moment you step beyond to...
It's just everything else.
Instantly. Anything beyond that instantly becomes the uncountable entire universe. In this biological baseline, the infinite literally begins at 3.
The infinite begins at 3. I mean, that completely reframes how we experience reality. I want you, listening right now, to just imagine navigating your entire day today using only the concepts of one, two, and many.
It would be so peaceful, honestly.
Right. You wouldn't check if you have exactly 12,245 unread emails. You You just have many emails.
Right.
You don't track exactly 2,000 calories. You don't obsess over a bank account dropping by exactly $42.
Shows a bunch of dollars.
Exactly. If you only had one, two, and a bunch, how much of your daily anxiety would simply evaporate? It really highlights how much of modern human stress is directly tied to our cognitive ability to track massive, precise quantities. We have engineered a world where we basically force our brains to constantly count the exact drops of water in the ocean.
It's an immense cognitive burden, and when humanity eventually decided to push past 2 and start naming the numbers beyond it, we were essentially deciding that the infinite was no longer good enough.
We wanted more control.
Precisely. We wanted to start carving up the universe into manageable, trackable pieces. We wanted to take the overwhelming many and actually conquer it.
Which brings us to the next massive leap in human consciousness. So from this concept of many starting at 3, human perception slowly begins to expand. People are starting to form slightly larger groups, settling into more permanent locations.
Agriculture is starting to take root.
Right. But early human cognition was still deeply anchored to the physical body. So if you can only confidently count to 2, how do you mathematically express the concept of everything in the universe? How do you grasp the divine or the totality of nature?
You use the only tools you have.
Exactly. You look down at the primary tools you use to interact with the world, your own 2 hands.
This transition is where we really see the physical body becoming the very first blueprint for mathematics and philosophy. As society grew slightly more complex, the concept of 2 evolved mechanically.
It stopped just being a pair.
Right. It went from just meaning a pair to meaning totality. And the logic there is deeply rooted in physical survival. Think about gathering berries or grain. What is the absolute maximum amount of the physical world you can possess at one single moment?
Whatever you can carry.
Exactly. It's whatever fits in your 2 hands. 2 hands full is your absolute maximum capacity. Therefore, mathematically and philosophically, your 2 hands represent complete control over your immediate environment. It represents all.
The leap from 2 hands full of berries to the totality of the universe feels like a huge jump. But, you actually see this exact physical logic encoded into the mechanics of the earliest writing systems ever invented.
Oh, the Sumerian clay tablets are the perfect example of this.
Let's go there. Let's travel to the cradle of civilization, the Sumerian Empire in Mesopotamia, around 3200 BC. They're pressing these wedge-shaped marks into wet clay to create cuneiform.
Beautiful script.
It is. And when a Sumerian scribe wanted to write down the concept for the sky, or for a god, they used a specific symbol called the dinger.
The ding.
Right. And it physically looks like an 8-pointed star pressed into the clay.
Which is such an intuitive visual metaphor, right? You look up at the night sky, you see the stars, and you naturally associate the heavens with the divine realm. So that single star symbol represents a singular god.
But as we said, society was getting complex. They were developing massive pantheons of gods. The scribes needed a way to express a much bigger philosophical concept. They needed to write down the idea of all gods, or the ultimate divinity, the totality of the universe.
And this is where it gets brilliant.
Right. Because they didn't invent some highly abstract, completely new mathematical symbol for infinity. They used the biological baseline. They took the dinger, that 8-pointed star, and they literally stamped it twice, side by side. Dinger, dinger.
The mechanics of that duplication are critical to understand here. Linguistically, this is a concept called reduplication.
Reduplicate.
Yeah. Many early languages used it to show plurality, like saying big, big instead of huge. But philosophically, when applied to the concept of the divine, it is so much deeper than just making a word plural.
How so?
By placing 2 identical divine images next to each other, the Sumerians were expressing the absolute maximum. They were essentially operating on that 2 hands principle.
Ah, I see.
The underlying logic is, I have one god in my left hand and one god in my right hand. Both of my hands are full of divinity. Therefore, this represents everything. They duplicated the image to represent a full pair, and in that ancient mindset, a full pair represents totality, perfection, and ultimate control.
So dinger dinger isn't an equation saying one god plus one god equals 2 gods?
No, not at all.
A philosophical statement saying God and God equals the ultimate uncountable divine. It's the mathematical equivalent of basically holding the whole world in your hands.
Beautifully put.
And this wasn't just an isolated quirk of Sumerian clay tablets either. We see this exact same 2 hands philosophy emerge completely independently in another massive ancient civilization, Egypt.
Oh, the Egyptian hieroglyphs provide perhaps the most vivid physical proof of this transition from the human body to the mathematical infinite. We can see it so clearly in how they drew their most profound spiritual concepts.
Let's look at the ancient Egyptian concept of the Ka.
The Ka, right?
The Ka is this complex theological idea. It's
Yeah.
essentially your vital essence, your life force, the spark that distinguishes a living person from a dead one.
Mm-hmm.
So how did the Egyptian scribes visually represent this invisible, profound energy?
With the arms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The hieroglyph for Ka is drawn as two identical human arms, bent at the elbow at a 90-degree angle, reaching upward into the sky. It is the literal duplication of the arms. It isn't one arm pointing up. It requires two limbs reaching out to represent the totality of a person's vital energy.
And this mechanical visual language scales up even further when the Egyptians needed to talk about massive, overwhelming numbers. Consider the Egyptian deity.
Hey, H-E-H.
Right. He was the personification of infinity, of eternity. And mathematically, the god represented the number 1 million.
1 million.
Now, it is important to understand that to an ancient Egyptian during the early kingdoms, 1 million wasn't a precise ledger entry used to count bricks for a pyramid.
Like they weren't auditing exactly 1 million stone.
No, it was a conceptual placeholder for an uncountable eternity.
I want to paint the picture of how they actually drew the god hat, because the visual evidence is just stunning. If you look at the hieroglyph for this hat, it's a person kneeling or sitting, reaching their arms up and out, and in each hand they are firmly grasping a palm branch.
A palm branch, which is key.
Yes, because in Egyptian iconography, the notched palm branch was the tool used to tally time. It symbolized years. So you have a central figure holding identical symbols of time in both hands.
By filling both hands with symbols of years, the visual logic implies a span of time that is completely boundless. The hands are literally full of time. It is the visual representation of mastering the uncountable eternity.
It's that two hands biological model being scaled up to grasp the infinite cosmos. Okay, I have to jump in here and ask a clarifying question because my modern brain is struggling to separate these categories a bit.
Sure. What's the question?
When you describe the dinger holding all the gods, or the god Hay grasping palm branches to represent 1 million years, it sounds entirely like theology. Like, is this early math or is this early religion? Were the people writing these symbols doing accounting or were they praying?
That is such a great question. But that distinction you are trying to make, separating math from religion, is a deeply modern bias.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. We draw a strict, hard line between a calculus textbook and a holy text today. But to the Sumerians and the Egyptians, there was no line to draw. It was the exact same pursuit.
So they were doing both at the same time.
Exactly. Holding identical things in two hands was their earliest philosophical representation of mastering the physical world. If you could mathematically grasp the physical world, that naturally extended to mastering the spiritual world. Math was the language they used to describe the divine order of the universe. When an Egyptian scribe was drawing the god Hay to represent 1 million, they were doing theology and mathematics simultaneously. The number was the deity.
That is such a beautiful synthesis. Math and the divine just completely intertwined. But, as history shows us, beautiful philosophical models eventually collide with hard physical reality.
They always do. Logistics always win.
Right. This bodily connected two-hands model of the universe eventually ran into a massive logistical wall. Humanity moved out of the early river valleys. They started conquering neighbors, expanding trade routes, and building massive, sprawling agricultural empires.
The scale changed completely.
Suddenly, a king doesn't just need to represent the idea of a lot of grain. He needs to precisely track 40,000 bushels of grain to feed a standing army. He needs to tax 50,000 citizens. The two-hands model broke down entirely. You simply cannot duplicate a symbol enough times to effectively manage an empire. Numbers literally had to grow to match the expanding physical territory of human ambition.
This creates a major shift in the evolution of our ultimate number. As empires expanded, the perceptual horizon of humanity was forced to expand with them. They had to invent new numbers just to administer their new reality.
And different cultures handled this differently, right?
Very differently. It's highly revealing. Let's contrast the problem-solving approaches of the West and the East, starting with the pragmatism of ancient Greece and Rome around the 3rd century BC.
When we think of the Greeks and the Romans, we think of engineers, logisticians, conquerors.
Builders.
They built aqueducts, organized massive legions, established complex trade networks. They were highly practical, grounded people. And their mathematics deeply reflected that pragmatism. For the Greeks and the Romans, the absolute ceiling of everyday imagination, the biggest number they ever really needed or used in common language or trade, was 10,000.
In ancient Greek, this number is called the myriad, and the etymology of the word myriad perfectly captures how their society viewed it.
Mm.
It translates literally to countless or innumerable.
Which feels entirely paradoxical to us today. To us, 10,000 is a highly specific, very countable number. You can walk 10,000 steps before lunch if you're trying to close your rings.
Yeah.
You can easily have 10,000 followers on a social media app. But to a Greek citizen, 10,000 was the absolute limit of what mattered in reality.
It was a massive scale for them.
Right. It represented a massive invading army or the population of a large city-state. Beyond 10,000, you weren't dealing with reality anymore. You were dealing with mythology.
Yeah.
The language literally did not have a single word for a number larger than that.
It was a hard logistical boundary. But, human curiosity abhors a boundary. There are always individuals who feel trapped by the limitations of their society's imagination.
Always someone pushing the envelope.
Exactly. They look at the ceiling and want to break through it. And in ancient Greece, the man who decided to break the myriad was Archimedes.
Archimedes.
Yeah.
The legendary polymath of Syracuse.
Archimedes looked at the myriad, this cultural and linguistic ceiling of 10,000, and he just felt intellectually claustrophobic. He knew intuitively that the physical universe was vastly bigger than what a Roman tax collector needed to count.
He wasn't satisfied with the ledger.
Not at all. So in the 3rd century BC, he authored a truly groundbreaking manuscript called the Sand Reckoner.
The premise of the Sand Reckoner is basically the ultimate intellectual flex. Archimedes essentially looks at his contemporaries and says, "You think 10,000 is the limit of countable reality? You think the sand on the beach is infinite? Watch me count it."
He was showing off, for sure.
He sets out to calculate the exact number of grains of sand it would take to fill the entire universe.
And the mechanics of how he achieved this are astonishing because, remember, he first had to invent a completely new mathematical naming system. The Greek language maxed out at the myriad. He couldn't just write down a larger number because the words literally did not exist.
So what did he do?
He took the myriad, 10,000, and multiplied it by itself to create a myriad of myriads, which is 100 million. He called all the standard numbers up to 100 million the first numbers.
Okay, establishing a new baseline.
Right. Then he used that 100,000 as a new baseline unit and multiplied it by itself again, creating the second numbers and so on. He essentially invented the concept of exponents, allowing him to endlessly scale up quantities using building blocks of 100,000 dozen.
Hold up, my brain is starting to overheat a little. Let me make sure I understand the mechanics here. He couldn't just add zeros like we do in base 10 today. He had to create a system where 100 million became the new one, and then he built blocks of those.
Precisely. He called them octads, periods of 8 zeros. Once he built this theoretical math engine capable of expressing massive numbers, he had to apply it to the physical world.
He had to test it out.
And he started small. He estimated how many grains of sand could fit into a poppy seed.
That's pretty small.
Then, using basic geometry, he estimated how many poppy seeds could fit into a stadium. Then, how many stadiums could fit into the Earth.
Wow, he's just scaling up and up.
Then he adopted the heliocentric model proposed by Aristarchus, which drastically expanded the known size of the universe at the time, placing the sphere of the fixed stars incredibly far away. He meticulously scaled his poppy seeds up to fill that massive sphere.
He was systematically building a ladder to the edge of the cosmos. And what was the final number he arrived at?
He calculated that the universe could be filled with a number of sand grains that, in modern mathematical notation, would be 10 to the power of 63, a 1 followed by 63 zeros.
Sitting on the shores of Syracuse, drawing geometry in the dirt, he fundamentally shattered the perceptual horizon of Western civilization. He proved mechanically that the human mind could grasp and manipulate quantities far, far beyond what the physical eyes could ever see or what the empire would ever need to count. He treated the myriad as a bug in the software of human language, and he patched it.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. He treated the limit as a logistical problem to be solved. But if we travel across the world during roughly the same historical epochs, we see a completely different philosophy regarding the exact same number. Let's look at ancient and medieval East Asia, particularly Han Dynasty China.
This is where the contrast is so illuminating. In ancient China, the number 10,000, which is pronounced 1 in Chinese or man in Korean and Japanese, was also considered the ultimate number for a very long time. It was their ceiling, too.
But they treated it very differently.
Totally differently. They did not treat it like the Greeks did. Archimedes saw 10,000 as a mathematical limitation to be broken. The Chinese saw 10,000 as a profound philosophical symbol of absolute totality. They didn't want to break past it, they leaned into it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, in East Asia, 10,000 wasn't just a very large amount of things. It became the linguistic and philosophical container for everything that exists. It was a sacred boundary.
You see this embedded everywhere in the language and the culture. Think about the famous phrase shouted to emperors across the centuries, banzai in Japanese, manse in Korean, or wansui in Chinese.
Right. Long live the king.
Exactly. The literal translation of that cheer is 10,000 years. But when the populace shouted that, they weren't wishing the emperor a specific biological lifespan of exactly 10,000 solar orbits.
They weren't setting a timer.
No. They were wishing him absolute, unending life and infinite total power.
And this philosophy extended from the emperor to the physical world itself. In classical Chinese philosophy, the term wanru, or menmul in Korean, which literally translates to the 10,000 things, was the specific term used to describe the entire physical universe.
The 10,000 things.
The mountains, the rivers, the stars, the animals, humanity, all of the chaotic diversity of existence was neatly encapsulated in the idea of the 10,000 things. The number became the vessel that held reality itself.
But just like Rome, the Eastern empires kept growing. China unified, dynasties expanded, trade exploded, and the bureaucracy became mind-bogglingly complex.
Yeah.
A provincial governor might have to oversee tens of thousands of citizens. When everyday merchants start dealing in tens of thousands of copper coins, the philosophical weight of the number yuan diminishes.
It loses its magic when you use it to buy grain.
Exactly. So what did they do? Did they abandon the philosophy?
No, they sequentially expanded the philosophy. They needed to maintain that feeling of totality for the emperor's domain. So the culture linguistically invented the next level of infinity. They moved the philosophical goalpost up to OK, which is 100 million, and eventually, Joe, a trillion.
They just kept moving the ceiling.
They kept pushing the boundary of the ultimate number upward, ensuring they always had a singular word that felt massive enough to encompass the awesome, terrifying totality of the world.
So Eurasia, both east and west, was essentially wrestling with the same physical problem, how to count rapidly growing empires. And they both stayed relatively locked into this base 10 progression. Power is a 10, adding zeros, growing larger and larger. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
While Eurasia was stuck on base 10 and the practical limits of counting citizens and coins, an entirely different, incredibly advanced philosophical approach to numbers was developing completely independently across the ocean in the Americas.
This brings us to perhaps the most profound contrast in the entire history of mathematics. If we truly want to understand how the mechanics of a number system shape a society's perception of reality, we have to look closely at the ancient Maya, whose civilization peaked around the 4th to 9th centuries AD.
The Mayan civilization's approach to math is just astounding. We've been talking about the two-hands model, which naturally leads most of humanity, including us today, to count in base 10. You have 10 fingers, you count to 10, you run out of fingers, so your math resets.
It's an odometer that clicks over every time it hits 9.
Right. But the Maya looked at the human biological blueprint, and they didn't stop at the hands. They looked down. They counted 10 fingers, but they also counted 10 toes. And because they incorporated the entire limb structure of the human body, they developed a base 20 mathematical system, technically known as a vigesimal system.
That single mechanical shift from a base 10 odometer to a base 20 odometer completely altered their philosophical relationship with the cosmos. Let's do the ultimate comparison here, which is really the core focus of what we are unpacking today. Let's compare the Sumerian philosophy of numbers directly with the Mayan philosophy.
Let's do it. We established earlier that the Sumerians used dinger-dinger, two symbols, representing two hands full. The underlying mechanism was an external grasping of divinity. It was humanity looking out at the chaotic world, grabbing as much of it as they could in their hands, and declaring control over it. It is fundamentally an acquisitive, outward-facing philosophy, like I have conquered and held this much.
The Sumerian math is a tool for mastering external chaos. But the mechanics of the Mayan base 20 system create a fundamentally different worldview. To the Maya, the number 20 wasn't just a quantity of items.
No.
Because it represented all the digits on a human body, the fingers and the toes, the number 20 linguistically and philosophically meant one complete, finished human being.
Let me make sure you, listening right now, grasp this, because it's incredible. In a base 20 system, when you are counting up, the odometer doesn't click over until you reach 20. And when it clicks over, you aren't just registering two tens, you are mathematically registering one whole person.
Exactly. While the Sumerian numbers represented external grasping and control over the world, the Mayan number 20 represented an internalized completion. Mathematics, for the Maya, wasn't a tool to rule over nature.
It wasn't about dominating the environment.
No, it was fundamentally tied to human biology existing as a fractal pattern within the cosmos. You weren't tallying up objects you owned, you were counting iterations of human existence. The physical human body was the exact measuring stick of the universe.
That changes everything about how you interact with time and space. When a Mayan astronomer or priest was calculating the complex movements of Venus or the cycles of the sun, they were doing it through the lens of human completion. It wasn't us versus the universe. It was, we are made of the exact same mathematical cycles as the stars.
It's a beautiful way to look at it.
Can you walk us through the actual mechanics of how they wrote this down? Like, how do you actually do math with complete human beings?
Their written notation is brilliantly simple, yet capable of immense complexity. They basically used a combination of dots and bars. A single dot equals 1, a horizontal bar equals 5.
Okay, so if I want to write the number 19, I would draw 3 horizontal bars, which gives me 15, and then 4 dots on top.
Correct. But what happens when you add one more dot to reach 20?
Right, because in a base 10 system, we put a 2 in the tens column and a 0 in the ones column.
The Maya needed a way to show that the human being odometer had clicked over. They needed a placeholder to show that the first cycle was complete and empty, ready to start again. This philosophical and mechanical need led them to independently invent one of the greatest intellectual concepts in human history, the concept of zero.
The invention of zero. It is wild to think that European mathematics struggled without zero for centuries, using clunky Roman numerals, while the Maya had it fully integrated into their society. How did they visually represent zero?
They drew it as a stylized shell, often resembling a turtle shell or a conch. It represented emptiness, but not a negative void.
Not like a black hole of nothingness.
Right. It represented a vessel that had been emptied, ready to be filled by the next cycle. So to write 20, they would draw the shell symbol at the bottom to represent 0 units and place a single dot in the tier above it to represent one complete group of 20, one complete human.
And with that base 20 system and the mechanical power of the zero, they achieved things that were genuinely staggering.
Their ability to calculate deep time was truly unparalleled. Because their math was so deeply cyclical, based on the complete human form cycling over and over, carrying the burden of time, they created astronomical calendars that were vastly more expansive and accurate than anything their European contemporaries were using.
A long count calendar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Their long count calendar could calculate millions of years into the past and millions of years into the future. And they did it all based on cycles of 20 endless cycles of complete human beings mapping out the lifespan of the cosmos.
I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, to do a little thought experiment to really feel this difference. Think about how you view time in your own life right now. We view a decade as a major milestone, 10 years, based on our 10 fingers. We view a century, 100 years, as an entire historical age. But how would your relationship with time and with your own mortality change if your entire mathematical system was based on 20?
It would completely change your perspective.
What if every time you reached the number 20 or 40 or 400, you didn't subconsciously think, oh, that's a multiple of 10, but you mathematically felt that is the measure of one whole human life?
If you internalize that, it would completely shift your perspective from accumulation to participation. You wouldn't be counting how much time you have left to acquire things. You would be measuring where you sit within the endless chain of human lives, stretching back into the deep past and forward into the deep future. It is a profoundly spiritual mathematics, where the body is the bridge to eternity.
It really is breathtaking. It connects the dirt under your toes to the stars in the sky. But as spiritual and cosmic as the Mayan connection was, it still relied fundamentally on the physical body as the baseline. It was still fingers and toes.
True.
So what happens when a civilization decides to abandon the physical body entirely? What happens when a society looks at the physical world, declares it to be an illusion, and decides that only the pure, abstract spirit matters?
How do you count that? That is the ultimate mathematical challenge. And to find how humanity solved it, we have to travel across the globe to ancient India, roughly between the 1st and 5th centuries AD. If the Sumerians used hands and the Maya used the whole body, the Indian sages took a massive leap into the pure, abstract infinite. They essentially decoupled math from physical reality entirely.
The philosophy of ancient India is deeply rooted in concepts that just laugh in the face of human lifespans or logistical accounting. We are talking about the theological focus on reincarnation, the endless wheel of samsara. You are born, you live, you die, you are reborn infinitely.
And they didn't just apply this cycle to individual human souls, they applied it to the mechanics of the universe itself. They developed the concept of the kalpa.
The kalpa. Tell us about that.
The kalpa is a crucial concept here. It represents a cosmic cycle, the birth, the slow expansion, the eventual destruction, and the ultimate rebirth of the entire universe. And one single kalpa takes billions of years to complete.
Billions of years for one cycle.
And according to their theology, these kalpas happen endlessly, one after another, forever.
When your daily theology demands that you sit in meditation and contemplate endless, infinite cycles of entire universes being born and dying, a base 10 system for counting grain, or even a base 20 system for counting human lives, is entirely inadequate.
It's basically useless.
Yeah. Even Archimedes counting the sand grains in a single universe starts to look incredibly small and short-sighted. The ancient Indians required a completely new scale of mathematics. They needed numbers that could map eternity.
And they delivered mathematical concepts that are almost terrifying in their scale. To understand this, we look at the Buddhist texts, specifically the Avatamsaka Sutra, which explores the boundless nature of reality and the infinite scale of a Buddha's enlightenment.
What's in the text?
The text contains sequences where characters are essentially engaging in mathematical poetry, naming larger and larger numbers to express the majesty of the cosmos.
There's that famous story of Prince Siddhartha, who would become the Buddha, engaging in a mathematics competition to win the hand of his future wife.
Yes, exactly.
He is asked to name the highest numbers known, and he starts listing them off, going up by multiples of 100, past the millions, past the billions, all the way up to a number called the Talaksana, which is roughly 10 to the power of 53.
A massive number on its own.
Right. And then, just to flex, he casually mentions that this sequence is merely the first counting system, and there are many more systems beyond it. It is pure mathematical poetry. But the most mind-bending number we encounter in the Avatamsaka Sutra is the Asankhyeya.
The Asankhyeya. Just analyzing the linguistic root is telling it translates from Sanskrit roughly as incalculable or innumerable. But unlike the Greek myriad, which meant countless but actually just stopped at 10,000, the ancient Indian scholars actually assigned a specific, rigorous mathematical value to this incalculable concept.
Okay, I know the value, but every time I think about it, my brain just tries to reject it.
It's hard to hold in your head.
In modern mathematical notation, the Asankhyeya is 10 to the power of 140. That is a 1 followed by 140 zeros.
Mm-hmm.
I want to try to physically picture that. If I were to write that number out on a piece of paper, just the act of writing the zeros would take up lines and lines of text. But what does that number actually mean? Why would a society that doesn't have deep space telescopes or supercomputers need a number with 140 zeros? What physical utility could that possibly have had for them?
That is the genius of it. It has absolutely no physical utility. To truly grasp the magnitude of what they were doing, we have to compare it to our absolute most advanced modern physics. Today, modern cosmologists and astrophysicists have estimated the total number of fundamental particles, the total number of atoms in the entire observable universe.
Right. We're talking about looking from the edge of the cosmic microwave background all the way across the vast expanse of space. Every single burning star, every gas giant, every speck of cosmic dust, every grain of sand on Earth, and every cell in our bodies.
Everything. The estimated number of atoms in the entire observable physical universe is roughly 10 to the power of 80.
10 to the power of 80. The physical reality of our entire universe is encapsulated in just 80 zeros.
Yes.
And yet, ancient Indian scholars, sitting in temples thousands of years ago, without calculators, using nothing but pure abstract thought and profound theological necessity, were casually wielding a number 10 to the power of 140 that completely dwarfs the physical reality of the universe.
Dwarfs it is an understatement.
If you took every single atom in our universe and magically turned every single one of those atoms into its own entire full-size universe and counted all the atoms in those universes, you still wouldn't be anywhere near 10 to the power of 140. It is a number so large it just crushes the physical world into dust.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is one of the most stunning achievements in the history of human thought. By creating the Asankhyeya, ancient Indian civilization had successfully uncoupled mathematics from the physical world.
Completely detached from counting objects.
Yes. They shifted numbers away from counting things like grain or land or even human bodies to counting eternity itself. It represents one of the highest levels of abstract human cognition ever achieved. They built a mathematical system not to measure the dirt they stood on, but to map the spiritual infinity they believed in. They outthought the physical universe.
It gives me actual chills. It's the ultimate triumph of the mind over matter. They created a cognitive space so vast that the physical universe is just a tiny speck floating inside it. And the most incredible part of this entire story is that this thread, this relentless human impulse to keep pushing the boundary of the ultimate number, didn't stop in the ancient world.
Yeah, it's still going.
Didn't stop with the Maya or the Indians. It traces directly to us, sitting here right now.
The evolution of consciousness is still happening today. We are still playing the exact same game the Sumerians and the Indians were playing. The board has just gotten exponentially larger.
So what does this all mean for us today? What is our modern ultimate number? If you look at the 20th and 21st centuries, our reality has expanded rapidly. We don't just count land and grain anymore. We don't even just count atoms. We count data.
So much data.
We swim in vast, invisible, overwhelming oceans of internet data, complex algorithmic permutations, and cryptographic keys that secure our entire civilization. To handle this invisible new reality, we needed a new number. And we got the Googol.
The Googol, which is mathematically 10 to the power of 100, a 1 followed by 100 zeros. It is a number so incredibly large, it was famously used as the inspiration for naming the company that attempts to index the entire internet.
Oh, yeah.
It was chosen because it represents a quantity of information that, while technically finite, is practically infinite to a single human mind.
And in the realm of advanced theoretical mathematics, we have fully embraced the concept of absolute infinity. We don't just have one infinity. We as mathematicians studying different sizes of infinity, which feels like we are right back in the pages of the Avatamsaka Sutra, contemplating infinite cycles of infinite universes.
It truly is a beautiful synthesis. When you look back at this entire journey we've taken today, from the early human in the dense Amazon, staring at 3 batteries on a table and calling it the infinite many,
to the Sumerian scribe pressing 2 stars into wet clay to hold all the gods in 2 hands,
to Archimedes drawing geometry in the sand to calculate the edges of the cosmos,
to the Maya finding the cycles of deep time encoded within their own fingers and toes,
to the Indian sages mapping eternity with 10 to the power of 140, and finally to the modern data scientists trying to index human knowledge with the Googol.
It is all driven by the exact same mechanism, the exact same human desire to understand where we are.
The ultimate number of any given society isn't just a mathematical tool on a chalkboard. It is a mirror. It is a perfect, uncompromising reflection of the size of the world that a society is capable of imagining. When our imagination grows, our numbers grow to hold it.
And that brings us right to the edge of our own modern perceptual horizon. I want to leave you, the listener, with a lingering question to ponder long after this deep dive ends. Think about the massive arc we just traced together. If our ultimate numbers have grown from 2 to 10,000 to a Googol, just to keep up with our rapidly expanding data-driven reality.
What's next?
Exactly. What will the ultimate number look like for humanity 1,000 years from now? As we begin to interface with artificial intelligence or quantum realms or perhaps even other worlds, are we eventually going to invent a number so massive or a mathematical concept so bizarrely abstract that to even comprehend it, it forces our physical brains to evolve into a completely new kind of consciousness, just like the invention of the concept of 3 did for our ancient ancestors?
The horizon is always moving.
It is moving right now, and the numbers will be waiting for us when we get there. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey today and for diving deep into the profound philosophy that makes us human. Until next time, keep looking past the edge.